I think it does signal perhaps a new regional order.
Dr. Annelle Sheline resigned from State Department in March 2024 over American policy in Gaza. She's joining us today from Washington, and we'll ask her if the Middle East from 2024 is different from the Middle East of today, and what is Pakistan's role in the region. Dr. Sheline, thank you so much for joining us. If we can start with the situation in the Middle East since the war broke out. It's been 6 months. We've had 3 different bouts of talks, ceasefire. Now the situation is that the strait is closed. But since then, a lot has changed in the Middle East. If you were to compare the Middle East of, let's say, 18 months ago to today, how would you describe the Middle East back then and right now?
That's a great question. I mean, when we think back to around 18 months ago, it was at the end of the Biden administration. And at that time, I think that although there was certainly concern about the ways that the United States was enabling Israel's horrifying genocide in Gaza, there was not yet an indication of the extent to which that conflict was going to expand. The fact that the Trump administration was elected, I think initially Gulf countries welcomed. They felt they understood Trump. There was that initial trip that Trump took to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, his first major trip of his second term. Whereas in contrast, we know that it was only a month or so later, after Trump's trip in May, by June, Israel attacked Iran, and the U.S. facilitated that in what came to be known as the 10-day war. That was, in hindsight, quite limited. The U.S. did rein in Israel after 10 days. In contrast, what we have now is a region transformed, where because the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran on February 28th, and that Iran responded with quite significant attacks against the GCC countries, as well as Israel, to which the U.S. has been largely unable to really protect the GCC states from Iranian attack, we now have decisions like the Mecca agreement, the defense pact between Turkiye, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. You have the possibility that Egypt might join that. The members indicated that other countries are indeed welcome to join. And so there is emerging this alternative to a U.S.-led order. Instead, we're seeing countries in the region making very clear that they no longer believe the U.S. is a source of stability or a trustworthy guarantor of security. And so they are looking to alternatives. Again, I think that this didn't come out of the blue.
In February, you wrote an article in which you said that Qatar and Saudi Arabia were reassessing their position vis-a-vis their reliance on the United Nations. What is your answer now?
Or the U.S.
Yeah.
Their reliance on the U.S.
Yeah. My bad, yeah.
Yeah, so I published that piece right before the U.S. attacked Iran. And that was largely based on the reassessment that was driven by the fact that Israel attacked Qatar in September of 2025, which from the Qataris' perspective and from the perspective of the rest of the Gulf, that was really unconscionable. And Israel became seen as perhaps a greater threat than Iran. Now, obviously, Iran has shown itself to be quite willing to attack GCC countries. And so I think for many in the GCC, the concern is more squarely on Iran. But concerns about Israel do persist. And so the fact that the United States allowed Israel to attack Qatar, or that Israel felt it could attack Qatar without notifying the U.S., was very much a wake-up call for the GCC countries. So that's what precipitated that analysis. When I published that, it was becoming increasingly clear that the U.S. was going to attack Iran again. And so, again, everything that has transpired subsequently, again, has really reinforced this perception that the Gulf countries are unwise to rely primarily on the United States for security, again, given that the US allowed or didn't prevent Israel from attacking Qatar and has been unable to defend its regional partners from Iranian attacks.
And what do you make of the defense pact between Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia? How significant has that pact been?
It is quite significant in the signal it sends that these countries do not, and specifically Saudi Arabia, does not consider the US an adequate security guarantor. In terms of how it is operationalized, it is not yet clear. It's not entirely clear what exactly the Mecca agreement is going to look like in practice. However, I do think that it sends a very clear signal, and Washington certainly responded in recognition of that symbol. You had prominent commentators like Steve Cook from the Council on Foreign Relations or the neoconservative Robert Kagan writing in The Atlantic about how this represents the end of the U.S.-led era or U.S.-led order in the Middle East. And Trump also, he welcomed the announcement, saying that this was a very important and bold step, which is in keeping with Trump's general assertion that he wants other countries in the Middle East and in Europe and elsewhere to take more responsibility for their own security. The major exception to that is Israel. At this point, we do not see any indication that the Trump administration is trying to reduce U.S. support for Israel, despite the cratering of American public opinion on the right and the left, which is very much opposed to the U.S. continuing to subsidize Israel's security and Israeli aggression.
So coming back to the alternative US-led order that you mentioned, what is the alternative to that US-led order? A trilateral pact agreement is probably a manifestation of that, but I think that there has to be something much more bigger to this new world order that you're mentioning.
Certainly. So I don't think the Mecca agreement signals necessarily a new world order. I think it does signal perhaps a new regional order. And there were a lot of commentators in the Gulf which asked, well, why is Saudi partnering with Turkiye and Pakistan instead of turning to other Gulf partners? I think the answer is relatively clear. Pakistan is a nuclear armed state. Turkey is a member of NATO and a significant military power in its own right. So it's not so surprising that Saudi would seek these countries, especially Pakistan, given the Saudi-Pakistani relationship is quite deep. Turkey is a bit more surprising given the relatively recent history of tensions there. But again, I think increasingly we are likely to see these Gulf states looking for alternatives. And so it's possible, and again, the members of the Mecca Agreement said that it is open to other countries if they wish to join. My hope is moving forward would be something that my organization, the Quincy Institute, articulated in a project called the Better Order Project, which does seek to re-envision a post-US-led world order, which requires a return to international law, an emphasis on international institutions, which, again, the United States and Israel have been very actively dismantling those efforts by the international community to try to hold Israel accountable or to otherwise try to uphold international law.
You resigned from the State Department back in March 2024, if I'm not wrong. And during your time, Pakistan and the US, they did not enjoy best of relations, if you were to use that term. But since then, Pakistan and US have come a lot more closer. What do you make of that strategic shift or this radical shift in the relationship between the two countries?
I think Pakistan has worked very hard to try to be a useful mediator in the war that the US and Israel launched on Iran. Trump has indicated that he was frustrated with the more traditional mediators, Qatar and Oman, in part because they tried to prevent this war, which they were unfortunately unable to do. And so I think Trump was looking for an alternative, and Pakistan presented itself, volunteered, has been willing to take on this role. Certainly, I know that Pakistan has requested, I believe, currency support, a $10 billion form of sort of stabilization. So I suspect that the warming of U.S.-Pakistan relations does reflect Pakistan's utility to Washington in the current moment. But I can't say if that will persist, especially if we do see an incoming Democratic administration, what their view of Pakistan will be.
Another comparison that I would want you to draw on was from your time when you resigned from State Department. It was over Gaza, the genocide going on in Gaza. But I think in the last 2 years or so, ever since you and some other officers, they resigned from the State Department, there has been a lot more vocal opposition on what is happening inside Gaza. How do you see the current climate inside the United States right now vis-a-vis United States attitude towards Israel?
This shift has been massive. And as you said, people are reevaluating their understanding of the conflict. In particular, I think part of this is driven by the way, just a general American frustration with corruption in this country, the fact that the Israel lobby is seen as controlling political outcomes, similar to other lobbies, the military industrial complex, the hold that has on Washington, the pharmaceutical industry. Americans are aware of all of the ways that money is corrupting our politics and preventing outcomes that the average American would prefer, which again was what Trump tapped into when he said no more foolish wars in the Middle East, for example. So I do think that, again, social media has played quite a significant role in humanizing Palestinians for Americans who had previously perhaps not really understood what Israel's occupation and now genocide actually meant on the ground. And increasingly, we're also seeing authoritarianism, the ways that by both the Biden and now Trump administration have been cracking down on free speech in support of Palestine or criticizing Israel, that these individuals have ended up imprisoned or deported. These efforts to crack down on universities, to impose the IHRA definition, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism, which equates criticism of Israel with criticism of Judaism, which is incorrect. People can criticize the actions of the state of Israel without also then being anti-Semitic or applying that to the global population of Jewish people. So many people in the United States, I think, now see a willingness to criticize Israel as an indication of a politician's genuineness and their willingness to fight for them, for their interests as their constituents, whereas to continue to parrot the official line to say
Dr.
that Israel is
Sheline,
not.
I'm afraid, but this is all the time we had. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank you for having me.